I am Richard Owen, and I am Director of the Swansea Law Clinic, which is part of the Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law at Swansea University. And this clip will be about student wellbeing, how to promote your own wellbeing in the clinic. We will be going through a number of topics in this session. We'll be looking first of all at physical safety in the legal advice setting, well-being in the legal profession, considering when stress is beneficial to you and when it is excessive and maybe having a toxic effect on your well-being, and consider why most people thrive working in legal advice settings, but a minority do not, and how you might get yourself over to the thriving side of the equation, and considering other ways to thrive both in life and in a legal advice setting. So first of all, we're going to look at physical safety in the University Law Clinic. Now, the vast majority of clients are very grateful for pro bono advice. However, they nearly all have problems which are stressing them and causing them anxiety. And so a small minority of people will have difficulty containing their frustration. Now, it may well be that you don't encounter such situations in your clinic experience, because such cases are very rare. And in my own experience, it's only about 1% of my caseload where this is applicable. However, because it potentially creates a risk to your own safety, it's vitally important that you're prepared for such situations, even though they're unlikely to occur. So first of all, I suggest you check the security system and check where alarms are located if advising face-to-face. If alarms are not installed, then ask if personal alarms, which are portable, can be purchased for you. Always sit nearest the door of any client interviewing room, so you can leave the room first if a client's behaviour makes you feel uncomfortable. Now, if you're meeting with a client via Zoom or Teams, make sure that only your first name shows. Now, there is no identifying information which identifies you and is visible to the client, either in the background or displayed in some other way when talking to the client. Now, there's often a rule against lone working in a clinical setting, particularly for student advisors. In my view, this is best practice. So if it's not a rule where you're working, I would raise that with your supervisor. If you're visiting premises outside the clinic, your supervisor should be aware of this and approve the visit, and a health and safety risk assessment should be done before the visit takes place. Now, check if there is a refusal to advise procedure. Now, it's always preferable to work through any frustrations and stresses a client is facing. After all, we are there to help them. But if a client does not cease to be aggressive or calm down, you may reach the point where you decide enough is enough. Contact your supervisor if you feel this point has been reached. And always remember that universities have equalities policies, and this applies to everyone involved in a university. So although they're primarily addressed to staff and students, they would also apply to someone using university services, such as a client. So they've got to adhere to university policies as well. So if someone makes a comment which you feel breaches the Equalities Act, you should notify your supervisor. And at the very least, that client should be challenged on that comment. And in extreme cases, you would refuse to advise a client in that type of situation. Now, if we start looking at your mental well-being, well, this really will enhance your employability if you're able to identify stress and have techniques to manage your stress as well. Because work-related stress, depression or anxiety accounts for 40% of work-related ill health and 49% of working days lost. So this is the opportunity when you're in the clinic to develop these coping mechanisms, which will hopefully hold you in very good stead for the rest of your working career. Now, stress is a worldwide phenomenon in the legal sector. Research in the United States by Johns Hopkins University found that lawyers were 3.6 times more likely to be depressed than the general population. And that was the highest rate of any occupation in that research. And they looked at 100 occupations. But surveys have also shown that 1 in 3 Australian lawyers have depression. But there are 2 ways of looking at this data. So a third of Australian lawyers are depressed. Well, that could possibly mean that 2/3 of Australian lawyers are thriving. So why do the majority thrive? And how do they do that? And this is what we'll be looking at next. So not all stress is bad. In fact, if we had no stimulation, we would be called what's called under stress. And that is also thought to be harmful. So stress can be beneficial and motivating. It's excessive stress that's the enemy. So changing the way you think about stress can be beneficial. And it's always important to remember that stress is subjective. So stress affects different people in different ways, and it affects the same people in different ways at different times. And we'll be considering the significance of this later. So it's very important you recognize the symptoms of excessive stress. And if you feel you are showing these symptoms, you should be getting some sort of medical assistance. So are you suddenly showing sleep deprivation or physical changes such as headaches, skin complaints, frequent colds, aching muscles, digestive problems? They are often indicators of stress. Have your drinking or smoking habits suddenly altered? Are you suddenly drinking much more alcohol than you were previously doing? That is a possible indicator of excessive stress. Have your eating habits suddenly changed? Are you suddenly comfort eating or skipping meals? Either of them can be indicators of excessive stress. Are you suffering mood swings? Are you suddenly angry 1 minute and then feel fine the next? Are you frequently becoming irritated or frustrated, perhaps over small reasons? That would be possible indicators of excessive stress. And I think something to take seriously is if people are telling you you are not being yourself. So if other people are complaining you're short-tempered, selfish and difficult, or that you're suddenly showing any of these attributes, then I would consider speaking to someone and seeing if you are suffering from excessive stress. And in some cases, you may be suffering panic attacks. So this can happen suddenly for no clear reason. You may feel sick, short of breath, shake, sweat, and experience a sense of unreality, as if you're detached from the world around you. If you're showing any of those symptoms, you should get specialist advice and assistance. Now, there are always people to talk to. The important thing to remember about a university law clinic is it's a very good preparation for working life, particularly in the legal advice sector, but you are very well supported. So you have a supervisor, but in addition to that, your university will have a wellbeing service. There is a 24-hour helpline, the Samaritans, and an excellent charity is called Law Care, and that is staffed by people who are trained counsellors who have also worked in a legal environment. And they support anyone who's involved in the law, including law students. And they have a helpline and a live chat, and the times of both are given there. And it can be particularly useful to talk to someone who has been in stressful situations which are similar to your own. So they know what it's like being in a work environment which is a legal advice environment. So they will know the sort of pressures you are under, because a lot of pressures you are under are inherent in the system and you do not have control over them. There will be a service level agreement with your client by which time the advice letter must go out. There will be deadlines for your assessment and so on, and you do not have control over these stresses. So talking to someone who's familiar with these sort of stresses can be very helpful. So what I tell my own students is you don't want to be a good lawyer and bad at life. So let's examine what I mean at this. So there's been a study of law students at the University of Virginia that found pessimistic students outperformed optimistic students on grade averages. So you don't really want to be succeeding in your legal studies at the expense of having an optimistic personality. So what are the things that help us succeed in law? And can we strike some sort of balance whereby we can be both good lawyers and have very good relationships outside of our legal space? Well, the sort of attributes that make you a good lawyer are listed here. So perfectionism, attention to detail, competitiveness, drive, ambition, skepticism, good at debate, an analytical mind, ability to see all sides of an argument, and cautiousness. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with these things. It's obviously very good in a legal setting to be a perfectionist and have attention to detail. But do you want in your private life to have perfectionist attention to every little detail in your private life? So it might work very well in the university law clinic, but will it work so well when you get at home, or you're out with your friends, or you're with your family? Now, competitiveness, drive, and ambition is superb. We wouldn't get anywhere unless we've got some drive or ambition or competitiveness. And let's face it, most people in the legal profession have got some degree of all those attributes, even if it's just competitiveness with themselves. But do we want our lives to be solely about competitiveness and drive and ambition? Because if that's all we are exhibiting, no doubt we will burn out and we won't last the course. So we've got to strike some sort of balance whereby we can give vent to our competitiveness and drive and ambition, but also have space for more nurturing activities as well. Now, being skepticism and good at debate and analytical mind is excellent qualities to show in the university law clinic, but if you're scoring debating points continuously off your family and friends, that might not enhance those relationships. So it's some sort of balance we need to strike. And I think the important thing to remember is what an academic writer, Krieger, has said, is that thinking like a lawyer can be a damaging paradigm because it is usually understood as a new and superior way of thinking rather than an important but strictly limited tool. I've added my own emphasis there. So the problem tends to be that people think being hypercritical, highly skeptical is the best way to be. And that is not really the full picture. It's the best way to be in the legal office, but not necessarily in your own private space. And you should be aware of that and knowing when it's time to sort of leave all that hyper analytical approach and just instead give more joy, have more joy in your life, give more space to spontaneity and just having a good time and letting go a bit more than is appropriate in the law office. Now, it's very important to be aware about stresses existing on 3 different planes. So you've got the me, what's going on in your mind, the intrapersonal, which is going on in your mind. And we will see why it's important to develop self-awareness about what is going on in your mind, because that is something you can control. That is a stressor you can control, and so it can be an important coping mechanism. And your internal voice is often your most severe critic. Your family, your friends, your colleagues will often go much easier on you than your own internal voice. So that is something you need to be monitoring. Now, the other thing going on in our life is the interpersonal, what's going on between minds when they meet, both one-to-one and in groups. So what's going on in our interpersonal relationships at work, in our own relationships in our private life, what is going on in them? Are there stresses in them, or are they going well? All these things we need to be aware of. And then the third dimension is your environment. What is your current and past environment? What's happened to you in life? What experiences have you been through? Have you been through adverse childhood experiences? And these may have some sort of effect on your thinking in later life. So that's something you need to be aware of. What's happening to us and around us helps us make greater sense of why we are reacting to situations in a particular way. Now, we'll now look at resilience, and I have looked at all sorts of definitions of resilience, but my favorite definition is just one made-up word: your bounce back ability. We all go through negative events. How do we develop coping strategies so that we bounce back quickly from negative events? Now, it's unrealistic to think we can be shielded throughout our lives from negative events. So we need the tools to bounce back from them, to get back to a situation where we are thriving. So an academic writer, Rodham, she identified 5 areas we need to consider. First of all, awareness. We need to be aware both of ourselves and our situation. So aware of what's going on in our mind, what's going on in our environment. That we need to be diverse. We need to have more than one life. We need to have a work life, a private life, hobbies and interests. So if we become unbalanced and we become workaholics and only have one life, that could affect our resilience, because if anything goes wrong in the workplace, and things will go wrong from time to time in the workplace, it will feel like our life has come to an end. But if we've got a diverse life, we've got a sort of hinterland, we haven't just got an office life, we've got a good connection or network, we've got a good family network, we've got a good network of friends, and we have hobbies which give us joy, then if something goes wrong in one part of our life, then we can console ourselves that things are going better in another part of our life. Now, we should be integrated. We should look at ourselves as a whole person. Now, perfectionism tends to make you very good at law, but it tends to mean that you'll berate yourself if things go wrong. And that might mean that you have a tendency to get things out of proportion. Whereas if you've got a very integrated view of yourself, you've got awareness of your strengths and weaknesses, and we all have strengths and weaknesses, and you have a very good awareness of both, then if something goes wrong, you have some slight setback, you will think, well, that really isn't my strong point. That is an area I need to work on, but you'll keep some sort of perspective on it. You'll know I am very, very strong in other areas. This weak spot doesn't define me. I am a whole person with tremendous strengths. Okay, I've got areas I need to work on, but that's not the whole me. Now, you need to be self-regulating. You need to be modulating your reaction to things. If we erupt at the slightest irritation, that is very poor for mental well-being. We need to find ways of regulating our emotional response. And of course, all of these things feed into one another. So having self-awareness makes you very good at regulating your emotional response. So if you're feeling annoyed by something relatively trivial, if you're a very aware person, something inside will tell you, well, look, I mustn't overreact. This is annoying. It shouldn't happen. But it's not the be all and end all. Come on, let's get a sense of proportion about this. And this will help in terms of your resilience. And it's important to be adaptive. Your life is constantly changing, and you need to assess changes which are going on in your life. So you need to be flexible and adaptive to these changes. And of course, things will happen to us in life which increases our own risk of vulnerabilities or decreases our risk of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities can be dynamic, so they can change over time. And so if you're aware of that and you need to adapt, think you're in a particularly vulnerable place at the moment, it's very important then that I have an integrated view of myself and that I'm kind to myself. I take time out to recharge my batteries so that I'll be able to continue pursuing my ambitions in a sustainable way. So latest research suggests there are 5 actions in our day-to-day lives which are important for our well-being. So first of all, to connect. to connect with others. So we're connecting well. We've got good networks at work. There are people we get on well with at work. We have effective relationships with at work, but not just at work. There are people we connect with in our own private life. We've got good network of friendships and family and other support networks and support networks that might exist as part of our hobbies and our interests and so on. So if we're well connected and we're not isolated, we're more likely to be thriving and have a good sense of well-being. Being active is another way to promote your well-being. So we should be taking regular exercise, and we should be aware as well what's going on around us. Many people get great pleasure out of nature, for example. So if you're aware of what's going on, even if you're in a big city, you might hear a bird singing or whatever, and that is thought to be a way of promoting our own well-being. And taking notice, noticing things which are both positive as well as negative, being grateful for what is positive in your life, and noting, well, that's in my life and that is very positive, is very good for our well-being. And learning from situations. So you feel that you're constantly being stimulated in new ways is very beneficial to our well-being. And of course, the University Law Clinic is a very good place to learn, not only about the law, but you learn about people and how you interact with people, and that can be very beneficial for your well-being. And it's also thought that some degree of altruism, giving, is very good for our well-being, and obviously a university law clinic can be very effective in terms of promoting our well-being in this particular way. Many of you watching this will volunteer in your clinics, you're giving up your free time. That's a purely altruistic act, and the payback you get is not in terms of money, but seeing the positive impact you're having on people's lives. And having that sort of impact is noted for being very, very beneficial for your own well-being. So if you do feel you're showing signs of stress, what are good coping strategies? Well, anticipation is one. Particularly before your first client meeting, you might be feeling slightly apprehensive. That is quite natural. That ought to be a level of stress which is beneficial. It's sort of motivating you, thinking, yes, this is a bit stressful, but I really want to do this. So how can you manage those nerves in the best possible way? Well, anticipating. It might be sort of worth working through scenarios beforehand. So what if the client is late, or what if the client is early? How will I react? What if my fellow student advisor hasn't done what they've promised to do on time? How will I react to that? And thinking about these things ahead of time is very beneficial in terms of managing your stress. Affiliation, having good networks, we've already discussed, is recognized as a very good way of managing stress, as is altruism, which is another good way of managing your stress. Humor can be a very good way of being realistic about situations, being objective about situations. You have to be careful how you express it with clients. You've got to come over as professional, so you can't come over as sort of as a joker or someone who's not taking the meeting seriously. But if you see an opportunity to lighten the mood of a client meeting, or lighten the mood of a meeting with your supervisor, your fellow student advisor, that can be a very good way of managing stress. Now, self-assertion. So not bottling up what's bothering you. So you should assert your needs. You should not do this in a manipulative way or a coercive way, but just expressing your needs. Say, for example, your fellow student advisor has not turned up when they should have done. I mean, you should really challenge them over this and say, well, I was relying on you to turn up. I know real life can intervene sometimes, and we don't have much control over that. But nevertheless, that is now causing me problems. I really would appreciate it in future if you would turn up on time. That is a way of asserting yourself without being manipulative or coercive, but it's also a way of promoting your own well-being, because you're not bottling up that frustration and so on. Now, self-observation is a very important coping strategy. Most of the time, people find working in a clinic very, very rewarding because they see people in difficult situations and they have the opportunity to help them. And we know that is very beneficial for our own well-being. But we also know that virtually all clinic clients are stressed to a greater or lesser extent by the problem they come to the clinic about. And sometimes people will exhibit their stress in ways which you would prefer they wouldn't. You know, they might appear short-tempered, or cross, or clipped in the way they talk, and so on. So watching yourself and how you react to your client's emotional state can make you better at managing that and will help you reduce your own stress as well. Now, sublimation. Now, there are frustrations in any working life, and some of these frustrations we have no control over, such as deadlines and so on. And so what do we do with that? What I've said, it's important not to internalize these negative emotions, but sometimes we have no choice because we've got to behave in a professional way. Well, what specialists say you should do is sublimate. So find some positive way of channeling that frustration, whether it's going circuit training, going for a run, going for a brisk walk, doing anything where you feel you've got some channel to let that sort of frustration out, and that it's expressed in some sort of positive way rather than you're bottling it up in some sort of negative way. And the last coping strategy is suppression, which we sometimes call press pause. So what do we mean by press pause? So you're finding that your emotions, your stress levels are slightly running away with you. What should you do? Well, take a brief step back. Just start thinking about yourself. How am I breathing? Am I so nervous I am breathing rapidly? Okay, I'll take a few deep breaths and slow my breathing down. Scan your body for physical sensations. We often exhibit our stress physically, sometimes by clenching our mouth, sometimes by pulling in our stomach, sometimes by hunching our shoulders. Is our body language exhibiting stress? Well, let's just relax those shoulders. Do those deep breaths mean I don't pull in my stomach? Am I stopping clenching my jaw? All these things, just becoming aware of yourself, scan yourself to slow down this sort of emotional overload that you're going through. Am I noticing any strong emotion? Am I overreacting to some relatively trivial event? Well, think about those thoughts. Well, think, well, that is irritating, but this depth of this reaction is disproportionate. Let's just reset and get this in proportion. And then once again, return to being aware of your breathing. Has your breathing returned to some sort of normal pace? In which case you've probably slowed down this stressful overload. So what are ways of dealing with stress if you're feeling you are stressed? Well, it can be a very good idea to keep a stress diary. Now, this is a worthwhile investment. We're looking here at skills that will hopefully hold you in good stead, not just in the university law clinic, but throughout your working life. And your reaction probably is, well, I'm very busy with my studies, I'm taking on a lot of new duties in a clinic, I'm getting to grips with interviewing techniques for the first time, writing attendance notes for the first time, drafting advice letters for the first time, and now you're asking me to keep a stress diary. But this could be something that holds you in very good stead throughout your life. If you can correlate your stress reactions to certain activities or events, then you will learn to cope with those stressful events in a much more effective way. If you think, well, every time a client has spoken to me in a slightly offhand way, you notice from your diary that your stress levels go through the roof, then obviously you will learn to develop coping strategies every time a client speaks to you in an offhand way. Try to be objective. So try to think all the time, well, is this reaction proportionate to what this has happened? Now, a very good way of dealing with stress can be to have a community of practice. So speak to people who are in a similar situation to yourself and discuss with them your various reactions. You should only do this to people you trust, but if you can have what's called a community of practice, people who know what it's like to be meeting with a client for the first time when you're an undergraduate student, say, or know what it's like to be preparing for a tribunal hearing for the first time, say, and they have been in that situation or currently in that situation, and discussing how you tend to react to various incidents. That can be a very good way of developing techniques. And it's always very good to be part of a learning community when you're dealing with stress. So forming some sort of community of practice will help you deal with these stressful events and also help you make you be a more effective advisor for your clients as well. Now, prioritize, do not overcommit. Now, things are coming at you in many directions. When you're a law student, you want to do well in your studies, you want to get the most out of social life in university, you want to take up possibly new hobbies or sports, and you've heard it's important to get good work experience, which it is, but do not overcommit. So you will know best how much time you've got, and you should allocate your time accordingly, and do not overcommit and prioritize. Have some sense of what must come first, what can come second, what is something that is relatively low priority. Take breaks through the day, take a lunch break and short breaks through the day. It's important to remain active during the day. Do one thing at a time. When we're suffering from excessive stress, everything tends to flood into our mind at the same time. And you tend to think everything has got to be done immediately. And it doesn't. You break down tasks, particularly complex tasks, just break them down into chunks and stages. And that should help you be calmer in your response. Eat healthily, exercise, drink moderately, avoid smoking. Now, research from Western Australia suggests that high intensity exercise is very important for emotional well-being, but only 8% of law students in Western Australia in this survey were found to do it. So it would appear statistically the majority of us do not take enough high intensity exercise. So make sure you've got space 3 times a week for at least a high intensity exercise. If you're suffering a panic attack, try to keep calm, slow your breathing, and wait for it to pass. In other words, press pause. So wait until your breathing has returned to a more normal stage. If you've had them before, think about how you coped with them before. If you coped with them before, you've obviously come through it. So how did you cope then? You clearly got the coping strategies. You just need to access them again. And think through your options. When we have excessive stress, we tend to think we have no choice. Well, usually we do. So think through your choices and always remember that in universities, you're in a supported environment. So there are other people you can speak to. There's a supervisor, there's a students' union, which usually has a vice centre, there's usually a wellbeing service, and there are other charities. Law Care is a charity I've mentioned before because of this idea of forming a community of practice, speaking to people being in a similar situation and just learning from each other how you've coped with being in those stressful situations. And that is the end of my presentation. My final comment is you should remember that most students find it very, very rewarding to work in a university law clinic setting. For most people, it is very, very beneficial for their well-being, but we never know what's going on in our lives. Remember the me, you, do, and that stress is subjective. What can be dangerous with stress is you think, well, I've dealt with this before and it never caused me any problem. So why should it cause me a problem now? That is not a helpful way of thinking because stress is subjective. Okay, you may have dealt with a similar situation in the past, But what else was happening in your life at that time? Were there other stresses then, or there were an absence of stresses then, which exist now? So remember that stress is subjective. So do not dismiss it because you think, well, I've dealt with this in the past successfully, and I don't seem to be able to deal with it now, so there must be something wrong with me. That is not a very helpful response because of the subjective nature of stress. Most of the time, this advice will not be needed or required because most people find university law clinics highly beneficial and very rewarding and also very good at CV building. Thank you.